Canto 91 is a short and sweet section, short and sweet canto, which powerfully expresses the poet's longing for Hallam, the poet's intense desire to see Hallam not as a figure, not as a vision, not as a dream, but as a man in flesh and blood. The poet wants to meet him in flesh and blood with all the freshness of springtime. Or let Hallam come more glorious, more gloriously, with all the ripeness of summer. The poet's demand is that Hallam should not come as a ghost in darkness, but as a personage of splendor, as a figure of splendor in light. Kindly note that this canto deftly works out, skillfully works out a series of contrasts including between dream and reality. Vision of a figure and man in flesh and blood. Darkness and light. Suppose Hallam were to appear before the poet suddenly. How would the poet take it? What would be his response to the unexpected appearance of Hallam? This is the subject matter of Canto 92. The poet observes that if such a thing were to happen, if Hallam were to appear in his old earthly form before the poet would treat it as a mere hallucination, even though the apparition might speak to the poet. Suppose the apparition were to reveal to the poet matters of exclusive knowledge to the poet and Hallam. Suppose the apparition were to reveal to the poet things known only to Hallam and the poet. The poet would treat it as only a wind of memory murmuring the past. It would not be sufficient to convince the poet that Hallam had returned to this world. Suppose the apparition were to reveal to the poet the future. Suppose the apparition were to give to the poet an account of what was going to happen, and do it correctly, do it accurately. Even that would not be sufficient to convince the poet, because the poet would see it as a mere spiritual presentiment. Coming things cast their shadow, and heavenly bodies above the horizon appear above the horizon, or seem to appear above the horizon, because of the refraction of light. Because of the refraction of light, heavenly bodies seem to appear above the horizon even when they are slightly below it. Thus, Canto 92 presents the speaker as a very rational person, as a very reasonable person who responds rationally logically to the strange situation of Hallam reappearing in this world in his old form. Canto 93 is a sort of development, a sort of amplification on Canto 92. In Canto 93, the poet says that he never ever will see Hallam again in his old physical form because no one returns from the land of the dead. Many have gone, many have gone to the land of the dead, but no one has returned. So it's simply impossible for Hallam to return to this world in his old physical form. But Hallam's spirit may communicate with the spirit of the poet. Hallam's spirit may hold communion with the spirit of the poet, and they may communicate with each other as spirit to spirit, as ghost to ghost. Hence the poet prays that the spirit of his dead friend may descend from the land of the gods, give up the company of the gods, give up the bliss that it is enjoying in the company of the gods, and arrive in this world. The poet requests Hallam's spirit to descend to this world and come near him so that the spirit of the poet may feel that the spirit of Hallam is near it. It is significant to note that the canto reflects the Victorian belief in ghosts. In Victorian England, there was the widespread belief that ghosts existed, that ghosts wandered about, that ghosts could communicate with the living, with the spirit of the living. And this precisely is what is spoken of in this canto. Canto 94 raises the important question: who can communicate with the dead? Not everyone can be in communion with those who have departed from this world. Only they who are fit to hold communion with the dead can do it. And who are they? Canto 94 says that the man who wants to be in spiritual communion with the dead must have a pure heart and a sound head. He must have noble impulses, divine affections. He must have a peaceful spirit. He must have a pure conscience. His heart must be purged of passions and desires. His mind has to be serene and fair. His memory has to be clear. His conscience has to be absolutely peaceful. The memory like a cloudless air, the conscience as a sea at rest. The memory like a cloudless air, the conscience as a sea at rest. When the man does not have these attributes, when the heart is full of noise, din, when the man is filled with doubt, when the man is the site of conflicts, when the man is the locale of suspicions, when the man is a victim of low desires, when the man is manipulated by mean feelings, he can only listen at the gates. He cannot enter the gates into the land of the dead. He can only listen at the gates and hear the household jar within. I think the best interpretation of the last few words of the canto is that such a man who is unfit to hold communion with the dead is able to listen only to what happens within himself, only to the turmoil, only to the turbulence within himself. Canto 94 gives us an idea of some of the ideals cherished by Victorian society. The ideal man, as mainstream Victorian thought portrayed him, was a man who was serene, calm, noble, spiritually motivated, divinely guided, affectionate, loving, untouched by doubt, suspicion, conflict, immoral desire. Whether such a man is capable of communicating with the dead or not is another matter. But this was what was seen as the ideal man by mainstream Victorian thinking. And Tennyson closely reflects this thinking in Canto 94. And one of the reasons, I shall be dwelling on it in some detail later, one of the reasons why the Victorians loved Tennyson so much and why Tennyson became a Victorian cultural icon is that his poetry closely reflected the mainstream thinking, the mainstream thought processes of the day. We now come to a very important canto, Canto 95, which showcases the mystic experience that Tennyson had in relation to Hallam. We often say that William Blake is a mystic poet. We often say that William Wordsworth is a mystic poet. But we seldom say that Lord Tennyson is a mystic poet. I think that this canto is one of the several pieces of evidence to demonstrate that Lord Tennyson was as much a mystic poet as any other mystic poet in English literature. The locale of the mystic experience of the poet showcased in Canto 95 is the lawn in front of the poet's house, the rectory in Somersby. It is night. It is a summer night. It is absolutely still. There is no motion in the air. The tapers burn unwavering because there is not even a gentle breeze. There is absolutely no sound, not even the sound of the cricket. There is absolutely no sound except for the sound of the flowing brook which comes from the distance. Bats whirl around. The poet and his companions sing old songs. The companions withdraw after the singing session, after the song session, one by one, to the house. They get into the house and they switch off the lights one by one, which means they go to bed. All the lights are switched off. The poet is all alone on the lawn. A passionate hunger seizes the poet. The poet wants to read the letters written by Hallam to him, the noble letters of the dead. That's how the poet describes them. The poet decides to read the letters written by Hallam to him. Word by word, line by line, the poet reads the letters and has a mystic experience. He enters a trance like state. As he reads the letters word by word, line by line, the dead man touched me from the past. That is it. The poet feels that Hallam touches him, and Hallam touches him from the past. Hallam is not present in the present. Hallam belongs to the past. He's dead. He's no longer there in the present. And from the past, the dead man touches the poet. The soul of Hallam is flashed on the soul of Tennyson. And all at once it seemed at last, the living soul was flashed on mine. Hallam is dead as far as his body is concerned, as far as this world is concerned. But the soul of Hallam is eternal, is immortal, is everlasting. And the soul of Hallam is flashed on the soul of the poet. There is a union of souls. And mine in this was wound and whirled about imperial heights of thought. The two souls together, the two souls together have a strange experience. The poet feels that his soul is whirled about imperial heights. Imperial heights means celestial heights, divine heights. It is as if the soul of the poet is whirled about under the guidance of the soul of Hallam through the boundaries of the universe. The poet, as the poet's soul rises higher and whirls over divine heights, the poet gets an idea of the hidden law that governs the apparently purposeless events of life. The poet gets a vision of spiritual truths which are invisible to ordinary human beings under normal circumstances. The poet gets a glimpse of the ultimate reality. The poet understands the secrets of the divine truth. The poet comprehends the harmony of divine law as it works through astronomical ages. And it is a law which is beyond the steps of time, beyond chance, beyond death. Aeonian music measuring out. Aeonian means everlasting, eternal, as long as the universe, as old as the universe, the music of the universe. Aeonian music measuring out the steps of time, the shocks of chance, the blows of death. The poet listens to the harmony of the music of the universe. And it is a music which is beyond time and chance and death. At length my trance was cancelled, stricken through with doubt. The mystic experience comes to an end. And the poet himself is stricken with doubt. He wonders what has happened, whether what he has experienced is real or not. The poet admits that it is difficult for the intellect to analyze and explain the mystic experience. Meanwhile, a breeze begins to blow. The night is coming to an end. Day breaks. Dawn develops into day. It may be observed that when Tennyson speaks of Ionian music in this canto, he seems to have been influenced by the ancient Western philosophical concept of the music of the spheres. The music of the spheres. Musica universalis. The concept is as old as ancient Greek philosophy. Musica universalis is the ancient philosophical concept that regards the proportions of the movements of celestial bodies, of the various bodies in the universe, including the sun, the moon, and the planets, as a form of music. This music is not audible, but it has tremendous spiritual, astronomical, philosophical, and religious, even mystic significance. Canto 96 is addressed to the poet's sister Emilia, better known as Emily, who was engaged to Hallam and who was profoundly affected by the shock of Hallam's death. It is said that when she heard the news of Hallam's death for the first time, she lost her consciousness. She fell unconscious. Emily was an was an extremely good-looking girl. She possessed a sweet heart, a tender temperament, and we get an indelible picture of Emily in the canto. Emily with her light blue eyes, sweet heart, and tender character. But the real subject matter of the canto is not Emily, not Hallam, but doubt. Doubt and the conflict between doubt and faith. Emily was not only a beautiful girl with a sweet temperament, with a good heart, she was also a staunch Christian. She believed that doubt is devil born. You tell me doubt is devil born. You must understand the circumstances under which Emily takes such a position. She has lost Hallam, perhaps the most important person to her in this world, under the most unexpected circumstances, under the most unreasonable circumstances. There is no explanation for the untimely demise of Hallam, for the unfortunate demise of Hallam. And yet Emily says, doubt is devil born. The poet does not seem to agree with her. The poet says that there is one person whose life demonstrates that Emily is not wholly right. You must understand that Emily is a staunch Christian. And what Jesus expects from his followers is faith. Not just faith, absolute faith, unconditional faith, unquestioning faith. And Christianity teaches that even the slightest trace of doubt is sufficient to destroy one's spiritual self. No wonder Emily declares that doubt is devil born. But the poet explains that there is one person whose life proves the contrary, and that one person is, of course, Hallam. The example of Hallam proves the contrary, because Hallam always grappled with doubt. Hallam had very strong doubts, and he grappled with doubts. Hallam had his doubts and fears, but he was a good man. He was perplexed in his faith. He was confused in his faith. He was surrounded by doubt, but he was pure in deeds. He always did good things, and he found his way out. He found his way out. Now we come to some very famous lines, two very famous lines of Tennyson. I quote, there lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds, unquote. I repeat, there lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds. What Tennyson seems to value is truth, is honesty, is being true to oneself. There is no point in saying that you believe if you don't actually believe. Faith is useless unless it is genuine faith. And in the case of Hallam, he reached his faith through doubt. To begin with, Hallam was beset with doubts and fears, but he overcame them gradually and reached faith. And this faith was pure faith because it had traveled through doubt and fear. It was not blind faith. He reached his faith by overcoming his doubts and his fears. And this faith was, of course, focused on the supreme power, that is God, who dwells in darkness as well as in light. And ultimately, the faith of Hallam was pure, was unshakable, was centered on God. And Hallam would never have, in the poet's opinion, reached this faith had he not traveled through doubt. Sir Emily's contention that doubt is dangerous, that doubt is devil born, is not right. According to the poet, Hallam was a good man. He did good deeds. He started off with doubt and fear. He grappled with them. He overcame his doubts and his fears and ultimately reached faith. And it was a faith which was pure and which was centered on God. In the last stanza, there is a big biblical reference. The poet speaks of Sinai. Mount Sinai is the mount over which, on which Moses received the Ten Commandments. But before the people of Israel received the true faith, they were making gods of gold. While Israel made their gods of gold, they were idol worshippers. They worshipped golden calves. The point that the poet is trying to make is that even the people of Israel, the chosen people, who were led by Moses, had to travel through doubt and fear, had to travel through false belief in order to reach a faith that was pure, that was holy. The argument that doubt and fear can be the starting point for the long journey to pure faith, such as the long journey undertaken by Hallam, is reinforced by the biblical example of the people of Israel who started off as idol worshippers but who ended up as people with a pure faith in God Almighty, in the one God, one true God. Before I read Canto 97, I would like to mention the book Alfred and Arthur, An Historic Friendship. Alfred and Arthur, An Historic Friendship by John Garrett Jones. John Garrett Jones. The central thesis of the book is that Alfred and Arthur, Tennyson and Hallam were gay lovers. In fact, John Garrett Jones points out that in Memoriam A.H.H is the longest poem in the English language written by one man about another man. And John Garrett Jones claims that Hallam was a promiscuous homosexual who was sent to Cambridge by his father in order to separate him from his boyfriends, from his lovers at Eton, as almost all his Eton classmates had gone to Oxford, and thus Hallam's father hoped to curb the homosexual tendencies in Hallam. But of course, the hope was in vain. In Canto 97, the poet says that the relationship between Hallam and Tennyson was like the relationship between two partners of a marriage. Let us not give a too literal reading of this canto. For in the last line of the second stanza, the poet says that his spirit was like that of a wife. My spirit as of a wife. My spirit as of a wife. In the relationship between Hallam and Tennyson, Hallam was the husband and Tennyson was the wife. Hallam represented knowledge while Tennyson represented faith. Thus it was a perfect combination. The husband being knowledge and the wife being faith. The husband and wife had a perfect rapport with each other. Their meetings were so warm that they could convert December into June. They could not stand separation from each other. Every parting was like death to them. They could never forget the early years of their relationship. They could never forget their courtship. Now, Hallam is dead. The spirit of Hallam sits apart, for death has separated Hallam from Tennyson. The spirit of the poet is weak and knows but the matters of running the house, but she continues to run the house as before. It is as if the husband has passed away and the wife continues to run the house after the departure of the husband from this world. The poet is like a devout wife. The wife feels that the husband is great and wise and dwells on him with faithful eyes. The wife says, I cannot understand, I love. The canto gives a vivid picture of the archetypal Victorian marriage, where the husband had the upper hand. The Victorian marriage, the Victorian marriage was not a relationship between equals. The husband, who would later become the father, was looked upon as the head of the family. The husband was intellect. The husband always knew better than the wife. The wife was faith. The wife was devotion. This metaphor also throws light on the relationship between Hallam and Tennyson. Though ultimately Tennyson became much, much more famous than Hallam because, for one thing, Tennyson lived a very long life while Hallam died ere his prime. For another, Tennyson was much more a systematic worker. Tennyson was much more capable of taking sustained effort than Hallam. But as this canto reveals, Hallam was intellectually superior to Tennyson. He was better read, better informed, wiser, and Tennyson had tremendous admiration for the intellectual powers of Hallam. It may be pointed out that this Victorian marriage model became a sort of universal model as a result of its being propagated all over the world where the British ruled. Throughout the British Empire, this marriage model came to be propagated as the ideal model, came to be accepted as the ideal model. And this marriage model replaced the indigenous models of marriage in the various parts of the British Empire during the rule of the British. Canto 98 alludes to a marriage, the marriage of Charles Tennyson, Alfred Tennyson's brother, elder brother, Charles Tennyson, who himself was a poet and who is now looked upon as one of the minor poets of the Victorian age. Charles Tennyson later changed his name to Charles Tennyson Turner when he inherited the estate of a relative. In 1836, some 3 years after Hallam died, Charles Tennyson married Louisa Selwood, and left on a European tour. The honeymoon tour of Charles Tennyson and Louisa Selwood was in Europe. They went to Vienna, the city where Hallam breathed his last. I think locally the city is known as a Wien, and Vienna is an anglicized version of its name. In the canto, the poet says that Vienna is an evil city, a corrupt city. It's a house of darkness. Evil haunts the city. The city snatches away one friend from another. The people of Vienna lead a sensual life, sensuous life. They lack spiritual peace. The shadow of sadness is cast over the city. Even the kings in Vienna cannot escape from the clutches of the shadow. Immediately, the poet tries to correct himself. It was in Vienna that Hallam passed away. And Hallam, in his letters from Vienna, gave a very different description of the city. He had great admiration for the city. Even today, the city of Vienna, the capital of present day Austria, I think at that time Vienna was the capital of the Austrian Empire. The city of Vienna does not lack admirers. It is the city of music. It is the city of dreams. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And this precisely was what Hallam was trying to convey through his letters written from Vienna. He wrote that he saw stately carriages pass to and fro. He called Vienna the best city. Hallam said that he saw contented crowds enjoying themselves, dancing and singing, making merry, amidst a display, a fantastic display, a spectacular display of firework, of colorful firework. I would like to remind you here of the old proverb, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Whether a city is beautiful or ugly, great or evil, depends to a large extent on the person evaluating the city, on the person's perceptions, on the person's perspectives, on the person's ideas, ideals, on the person's experiences. Thus, while Tennyson says that Vienna is an evil city, a corrupt city, a wretched city, over which the shadow of sadness hangs, Hallam says in his letters that Vienna is a great city, a beautiful city, a lovely city, an impressive city. Beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Focus of Canto 99 is autumn. You must remember that England has very specific seasons: summer, winter, autumn, spring. Unlike Kerala, which has only three seasons: hot, hotter, hottest. And I think this is even more applicable to the neighboring state of Tamil Nadu. The canto contains beautiful pictures of nature, of the English nature in autumn. We are told of the voices of the birds, the lowing of the herds, the brook, the meadows, the woodlands. There are many who feel that as far as England is concerned, autumn is the most beautiful season. The forests become a riot of color, orange, yellow, red. I'm going off track. Well, returning to the canto, the poet points out that it was in autumn that he lost the flower of men. That he lost the flower of men. It was in autumn that Tennyson lost Hallam. And as I have already told you, when Hallam died, the British politician William Gladstone exclaimed, "When shall I see his like? When shall I see his like?" There is no doubt that Hallam was an exceptionally talented, exceptionally endowed person, and Tennyson is quite justified in referring to Hallam in this canto. In the last line of the opening stanza of this canto, as the flower of men. Tennyson admits that it is not merely the death of Hallam that has taken place in autumn. Other things have also taken place. Bridal, birth, death. Marriage, birth, and death. All these things have taken place in autumn. And if you analyze the personal life of Tennyson, you will find that marriages did take place in autumn, births did take place in autumn, and of course the death of Hallam took place in autumn. As the canto comes to a close, the poet tries to establish a bond between himself and others sorrowing for lost ones. Sorrowing survivors are seen by the poet as kindred souls. They are very much like himself. Anyone who has lost someone near him, dear him, is like the poet. He is a sorrowing survivor. Even though they may be utter strangers to him, even though they may not know him, he invites them to mourn with me, mourn with me. Everywhere in this world, from one pole to the other, from the North Pole to the South Pole, wherever there is a sorrowing survivor, he is kindred to the poet. And all those who have lost their near ones and dear ones are invited to mourn with the poet. Canto 99 is a canto of generalization and universalization. For one thing, the poet points out that life is an unending cycle of marriage, birth, and death. There are several cantos in this work where the focus is solely on death, but not so in Canto 99, where the poet admits that it's not merely death which takes place in autumn, but also bridal and birth. So bridal, birth, and death take place in autumn. Secondly, the poet realizes that it is not merely he who has lost someone very dear to him. Loss of person dear to one, loss of a person near one, loss of a person dear to one is not a very uncommon experience. It is a universal experience in the sense that it takes place everywhere, in every society, in every country, from the North Pole to the South Pole. And that is why in the last stanza of the canto, the poet invites sorrowing survivors to mourn with him. Someone who champions the cause of Tennyson as a nature poet, especially when I teach in Memoriam A.H.H. These cantos give amazing pictures of the English countryside, making Tennyson one of the foremost nature poets of the English language. Take a look at Canto 100. I climb the hill. The poet climbs the hill. And from the top of the hill, the poet surveys the landscape around. And everything in the landscape, everything that he sees, everything that he hears, everything that he experiences reminds him of his friend, because they are all so closely associated with the poet's memory of Hallam. You must remember that as undergraduates at Cambridge, Tennyson and Hallam were in the habit of going for long walks through the English countryside in order to experience the beauty, in order to absorb the beauty, in order to internalize the beauty of the countryside. And this canto celebrates the memories of such walks. The poet says that everything that he sees, hears, experiences reminds him of Hallam, and these include the grey old grange. Grange is a country house with outbuildings. Grange can be a farm building. It's a beautiful word, it's an old word. In fact, there is the word granger, which means farmer, which is rarely used now. The whispering reed, the sheepwalk, the knoll of ash. Knoll means bound. Knoll means mound, small hill, heap. The sound of the linnet, the runlet is a small stream, so is rivulet. The meadows, the flock of sheep. In fact, everything that the poet sees, hears, and experiences reminds him of Hallam, reminds him of a kindlier day, a happier day, a day on which the fates had been more kind to him. And as he leaves the place, the poet has a very special experience. And leaving them to pass away, I think once more he seems to die. As he leaves the place, the poet feels that he is going through the experience of the death of Hallam once again. The fundamental point is that everything around the poet reminds him of Hallam, overwhelms him, and the poet feels as if he is going through the extremely painful experience of the death of Hallam all over again.